My cats.
Shut. Go.
Hey, everybody.
Oh.
What's up? Bennett's cats are excited to be with you tonight. It's Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. You don't need a signal in the sky. You don't need an assembling call. You know where to be right here. Convince me. It's Tuesday night at 6 o'clock with some of the coolest guys you know and Elrod. Here, as always, my name's Andy Rutherford, joined as always by Brian Bennett, Casey Elrod. Gentlemen, how goes it?
What's up?
What's up?
All right, guys. Tonight, we're discussing a topic that, to be completely honest, is not something any of the three of us are well-versed in. And that may be offensive to some of you. There may be things we say tonight that are offensive to some of you diehards, and if so, we apologize up front. But tonight we're discussing the age-old argument. Everybody loves their heroes. Everybody has their favorite superhero, their favorite comic book hero, but tonight we're discussing who made the best ones. Is it DC Comics or is it Marvel Comics? That's what we're going to be jumping into tonight. I will be mediating tonight, and I'm a great one to mediate. I know a little bit about both, but I know a lot about either. So hopefully these two gentlemen can educate me tonight, educate you, and I will be making a decision based on the arguments who can best convince me of which is better, DC or Marvel. Gentlemen, any words before we get started?
Yeah, I feel like we need like Tony Reale was on Pardon the Interruption a few years ago. He was like the error guy, like if you make mistakes, because that's what we're going to be doing tonight, I'm afraid. So we'll give it a shot.
We're going to offend a lot of people, probably.
We are.
That's why I'm mediating and not arguing any points. But tonight, to determine who's going to go first, I have a list here that's already made out to avoid any claims of shenanigans, to avoid any rumor and innuendo that the fix is in. But tonight, we're going to determine who goes first by who can guess my favorite Batman. My favorite version of Batman. And just to be clear before we get started, we're talking movies. So Adam West is out. He's not on this list. We're talking that have been made. Robert Pattinson's not on this list. I don't know if I'll like him as Batman or not. We'll see in the future. But there are 5 names on this list of men who have played Batman. If one of you can guess the number 1, you win. If you neither of you guess number 1, whoever gets the highest goes. I have them ranked 1 through 5. So Elrod, who do you think it is?
Val Kilmer.
Bennett.
George Clooney.
Well, you're both wrong. Val Kilmer and George Clooney were not my number 1. Val Kilmer or George Clooney were not my number 2.
Oh my gosh.
They were actually 3 and 4. They did both beat Ben Affleck for me. But as you can see on this pre-printed list, Michael Keaton number 1, Christian Bale number 2, Val Kilmer at number 3. So Elrod will win. Clooney 4, Affleck 5. So Elrod, are you going first or are you going to defer?
I'm going to go first and also say you would like the Michael Keaton Batman. You would.
Michael Keaton Batman was amazing.
Mm.
I'm surprised nobody guessed Christian Bale.
Should be another episode. The best Batman by far was Val Kilmer. No contest.
3rd best. All right, go ahead, Elrod.
All right. So this is tough for me because tonight I'm going to have to go against my childhood hero, Batman. I'm not representing DC. Representing Marvel. Now, before I researched this, I knew this is going to be an uphill battle because DC has Superman and they have Batman. Probably 2 of the 5 best superheroes there are. But when you look at it, Marvel has a deeper bench of heroes and villains. Marvel also has more believable characters. The DC characters are more godlike. They're not relatable. Me or you could be a Marvel superhero
No,
if something bad happens or something scientific happens. With DC, you've got to be almost predisposed to it. You've got to be a god, a Wonder Woman. You've got to be someone like that. Marvel has also dominated the box office, something DC has not done. The DC cinematic universe has been a disaster in the last 10 years. We'll get into that more tonight. But Batman and Superman are the DC universe. As we'll see tonight, Marvel has at least 10 to 15 great characters. DC does not. So I will convince you tonight that Marvel is better than DC. Guaranteed.
Okay. Before we get to Bennett, I just want to clarify. No, we will never be Marvel superheroes. I can speak for myself, and I can pretty confidently speak for you too. Bennett.
If you get bit or something happens with the nuclear reactor, you could be in the Marvel world.
Or we could die. All right. Bennett, DC over Marvel.
Well, first I'll say we could all be Marvel villains because they're pretty much nothing. So we could be villains, maybe not superheroes. This is gonna be a long one. I can already tell. Okay. I want to start with a story. Okay. We'll take you guys back to when I was just a young pup, a young lad. It's probably, I'm gonna say 4. Okay. And I have this distinct memory of being in my house and watching a movie. And everything is like dark. There's like really dramatic music during the opening credits, and like the camera is going around like these objects, shapes, you can't really make it out. And the whole time their dramatic music's playing, you're like, what in the world is this? And then at the very end, camera pans out and it's the Batman symbol. And that was my introduction to superheroes. Little did I know that was going to be the start of a lifelong fandom of being a fan of Batman. I mean, at the time, of course, you know, being 3, maybe 4 years old, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't understand the plot. I didn't understand how great the storyline was at the time. I just saw a dude in a bat suit and he was kicking butt, and it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And that's just something that's been like etched in my memory since, like I said, since I was like 4 years old. So that was a little story. Okay, anywho, Rut, riddle me this. I want to ask you a question.
Ooh.
When you think of superheroes, you know, good versus evil, what's the first thing you think of? And don't answer it. Do you think of Captain America versus Red Skull? Do you think of maybe Wolverine versus Sabretooth? Or Spider-Man versus Norman Osborn? Or do you think of Superman versus Lex Luthor? Not Lex Luger, but Lex Luthor. Yeah, I got excited too. I was like, oh man, Superman versus Lex Luthor. No, wrong guy. Maybe you think of the Green Lantern versus Sinestro. Or maybe you think of Batman versus Joker. DC Comics is regarded as the king of comic books, and they're a huge, huge part of American culture, and they paved the way for others to come along and try to follow in their footsteps. Marvel. If you want, we can go ahead and wrap this up and be done with the whole debate in record time. But if you're not already convinced, like me and the millions and millions and millions of other fans, it would be my honor to convince you that DC is better.
Very, very interesting. And I just want to point out that that Batman that Bennett saw at 4 years old kicking butt was Michael Keaton.
Oh God.
There it is, boys.
Just saying. Classic.
Mm.
All right, guys. Good opening statements. Now let's get into the meat of the matter. Where do we start? We start at the beginning. Bennett, I'm going to start with you. The DC Universe. Tell me its history. Tell me its origin story. Where does it all begin?
Well, DC didn't actually start out as DC. They were founded in 1934 by a gentleman by the name of Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, and it was under the name of National Allied Publications. And this didn't really start out with the intentions of what it's become today. Rather, at the time, this gentleman was just rather trying to turn a profit because of the comic strips that were going on at the time, like in newspapers, publications, stuff like that. The very first comic that they did was in February of 1935 called New Fun, the Big Comic Magazine. That was a hit, so then they decided to do a second comic that same year in December called New Comics #1. And an interesting fact about this is it's the same size publication that would set the industry standard that they still use now, back in 1935. The third comic was called Detective Comics, and this was in 1937. And what this did was a little bit different than the other two. This one started covering acts of fighting crime, and this would pave the way for such heroes like Superman and Batman. The fourth title that they did in 1938 was called Action Comics. This one is a big one. This one was responsible for Superman, and it really paved the way for the whole superhero genre. And it could be considered the most iconic comic book of all time. Ask any kind of comic enthusiast what is the holy grail of comic books, and they'll say that it's the Action Comics #1. And also another important date is 1941 is when we were introduced to Wonder Woman. And she is an integral part of this because she represents the empowerment of women, especially in 41, right in the middle of, World War II. So you have your big three. You've got Superman, then you have Batman, then you got Wonder Woman. These three right here laid the framework for the DC brand and what's called the golden age of comics. Then you fast forward a little bit. I'll try to make this quick. You have the 1950s, which they call the Silver Age, where they kind of had a reemergence of the comic book genre. They overhauled a lot of the characters, and they also introduced Flash, Green Lantern, and the Justice League. Then you go on to the 60s and 70s, which is called the Bronze Age, and that's when they really started evolving more into darker comics. They were more of a gritty style and a lot more mature. And also 1977 is when they officially adopted the DC Comics name. Fast forward a little bit further and you go into the 1990s. When the early 90s, I'm sure you remember this too, Rudd, there was a big, huge comic book boom toward the early to mid 90s. And also this ushered in the movie genre. You also ushered in more TV series, and also ushered in more of the merchandise and games. So that's a little history, a little bit of DC Comics.
Good deal. Elrod, tell me how Marvel got started.
All right. Well, Marvel started out almost the same way that DC did, except a little bit later. Marvel Comics did not start out as Marvel Comics either. It started out as Timely Publications. A fellow by the name of Martin Goodman started Timely. The first superhero that Martin came up with was the Human Torch, and that was the first one they had. And that was in 39. Of course, in 41, we had World War II and Pearl Harbor, but a couple months before that, Captain America comes to the scene before Wonder Woman. And Captain America in the first year sold 1 million copies. It was you ask anybody back then who the superhero was for that time, it was Captain America. He was kicking the Nazis' butt in Europe. And he captivated millions of Americans' imagination. Now, Goodman hired his wife's cousin, Stanley Lieber, later on to develop some new superheroes. Now, that name, you may not be familiar with Stanley Lieber, but you should be familiar with a guy by the name of Stan Lee. Stan Lee is Stanley Lieber, and he has been with Marvel until his death. He started out in 1941, so he was with Marvel for over 70 years, developing all of their characters. In 1961 is when you have the Fantastic Four. You later have Spider-Man, Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, Iron Man, X-Men, Daredevil, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, and the Silver Surfer. Later, Disney buys all the property in the 90s, but Stan Lee, this is something that DC doesn't have. They don't have a Stan Lee that developed everybody. He's responsible for pretty much all the major characters for Marvel, and that's something that DC doesn't have. So that's pretty much where we are, start to finish, with Marvel.
All right. You talk about the characters, so let's get into the characters. Let's get into these heroes. And I know that both Marvel and DC have, through 80 years now, well, close to 100 for DC, have some big hitters. They've got a deep bench on both sides, but kind of what we would call now the face of the franchise, the dynasty players. Elrod, walk me through the big hitter superheroes for Marvel Comics.
Well, if you remember back from 2008 when Disney purchased the assets of Marvel, you know all the characters just by watching the movies. You know Spider-Man came later on, but Iron Man was the first one in terms of the movies. But you have Spider-Man, the X-Men, Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, the Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Doctor Strange, Deadpool, Ant-Man, full Guardians of the Galaxy, Black Widow, Nick Fury. All of these heroes, like I said in my opening statement, they are, with the exception of Thor, most of these people are human beings that have something happen to them that give them special powers, or has some sort of accident that gives them powers. They're not godlike like you see in the DC universe, or they don't have an obscene amount of money like Batman that can go out here and do whatever he wants, with the exception of Iron Man, of course.
I was about to say.
With the exception of Iron Man. These people, I think that's a more relatable story, that you have just anybody can be a superhero. If you're in the DC universe, if you're not a Greek god's daughter, if you're not the royalty under the sea like Aquaman, you can't be a superhero. In the Marvel universe, you can. And I think that appeals to young people. And also, Stan Lee wanted to appeal to an older, he looked at DC and the other people in that time in terms of the heroes. He wanted to appeal to a larger audience. The heroes in the Marvel universe, a Captain America, a Black Panther, a Captain Marvel, Doctor Strange, especially a Deadpool, appeals to an older audience, certainly not a kid. If you've seen the Deadpool movies, you'll know what I'm talking about. Stan Lee could make a story about an Ant-Man. He could bring that to life. And look at the movies. These characters, it's just, the bench is so deep with Marvel. You can go on and on and on about the heroes. And they just have a deeper bench than the DC universe does. And he's going to get into Batman and Superman, but outside of Batman and Superman, maybe Aquaman, you don't have a very deep bench for DC like you do Marvel. So I would say Avengers has a much deeper bench than the folks at DC in terms of heroes.
Bennett, tell me about the DC big hitters.
All right, your big hitters for DC. Obviously, you've got Batman, who's basically a rich guy in a suit with some cool gadgets. He doesn't have any superpowers, but this character has been extremely versatile over the years. If you think back in the beginning, Batman was kind of more like jolly and it was more of a comedic approach. Then as it progressed, he got a little bit more like broody, I would say. And then it kept on going. And even in some of the publications, Batman is just downright dark. So he's shown that he could he could take on all these different personas and still survive the test of time since the late 30s. Moving on, you've got Superman. He's got about 1 million different powers, more or less. He's considered to be one of the most powerful in all of comics. You've got one that Elrod missed when he said I only had 2 or 3. He forgot about Wonder Woman. She is the most recognizable female hero. She's fierce. She is from the Greek gods, like you said, but she also represents a role model for girls because not all girls want to be Disney princesses. Some of them want to be fierce. She can also, of course, she can teleport and she can speak to animals. You've got the Flash, the fastest man alive, not Chris Johnson, the Flash. He's superhuman reflexes, his stamina, his agility, and he has the power to hit with the force of a dwarf star. Then you've got the Green Lantern. And there's been a bunch of Green Lanterns, but probably the most popular one is Hal Jordan. He's kind of a little bit more underrated, I think, but his power comes from this ring. And he has the ability to affect forces like gravity, radiation, heat, light. And he has one of the most powerful weapons in the whole DC universe. Then you've got Aquaman, who can control water through hydrokinesis. He's got skin it's real tough skin. It can like withstand bullets. And one unique thing about him is he can survive on land, or he can also survive underwater without having to worry about coming up for air. Then you got this little group called the Justice League. You've got Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman, and the Martian Manhunter. And this little Justice League inspired another group that goes by the name of Fantastic Four by Marvel. Those are my big hitters.
All right, both of you have hit on superheroes. But every great hero needs a foil, needs a villain. Bennett, tell me about the DC villains.
All right, hands down, DC has by far better villains than Marvel. Heck, Batman alone has better villains than Marvel. You know, you think if even the lesser named guys like Bane and the Penguin and the Riddler and Two-Face, that's just for Batman. Then you move on to one of the heavy hitters, the Joker. It's interesting thing, his true name or his background has never been revealed. Of course, he's the arch enemy of Batman, probably the most recognized villain ever. Move on, you've got Lex Luthor, who is Superman's greatest rival. He's an evil genius. He's the leader of the Legion of Doom, not the Legion of Boom, Legion of Doom.
Talking animal?
Yeah. He is obsessed with just trying to destroy Superman. He's like this evil genius dude. Then you've got this really, really wicked guy called Darkseid. He is the arch nemesis of the Justice League. He is one of the most powerful beings He's the ultimate evil. He is the ruler of the universe apocalypse, and he seeks just to rule the world. And it's funny, this guy too also inspired a villain for Marvel by the name of Thanos. So thought that was interesting. Then you've got another guy called Deathstroke, aka Slade Wilson. Okay. Marvel has a guy named Deadpool by the name of Wade Wilson. So you see this trend that's going on here. But anywho, this Deathstroke guy, they even look the same. They both have the black and red getup. He's a mercenary assassin. Does that sound familiar? And but basically, this guy is the enemy of the Teen Titans. And I don't want to leave out. I talked a little bit before about Wonder Woman and how she was a role model. They also have Harley Quinn, who initially was kind of a smaller name villain, I would say. She was the girlfriend of Joker. She was the former psychiatrist that had gone crazy in love. But in the recent, there's been a resurgence of her, and where she's kind of broke off from Joker, and now she's kind of like a lead role for the female villains. And most of the time, yeah, she cares. She doesn't really have any kind of like superpowers, but she walks around with her mallet and she walks around with her bat. But she is immune to toxins, and she has the power to heal nearly instantly. So I didn't want to leave her out. A couple of honorable mentions real quick. There's Doomsday, who has superhuman strength, speed, and stamina. He's immortal. He can regenerate. And he's the only character to defeat and kill Superman. Those are my villains.
All right. Tell us about the bad guys over in the Marvel Universe.
Well, he kind of touched on my main guy, Thanos. Thanos is the Mad Titan that we all saw in Avengers Endgame, Infinity War, and he made some cameo appearances in the other MCU movies. Thanos is probably the heaviest hitter of the list. Dr. Doom, the Green Goblin, if you've watched the Spider-Man movies, I guess the jealous millionaire of Spider-Man turns into just a hideous-looking dude on a skateboard or a hoverboard. Ultron, that had his own Avengers movie. Magneto from the X-Men movies. The Red Skull from Captain America, and also he made an appearance in the last Avengers movie as one of the arch enemies of Captain America. Doc Ock, if you're old enough to remember the original Spider-Man trilogy with his name is escaping me. I'll come back to that. Since 2002, Spider-Man has been rebooted 3 times. They're in the original Spider-Man trilogy. Doc Ock was the second villain in that trilogy. Let's talk about Loki. Loki is Thor's mischievous brother. He's also got a series that's going to be on TV coming up on Netflix. Now, the Batman villains, as Bennett said, are iconic. None of my villains are up to the same par as the Batman villains. They're just not. So I must concede this point, but in terms of the number of villains, I probably have a deeper bench, but he certainly has the more well-known villains just from the Batman series, the Two-Face, the Riddler. He has better quality on top, but I probably have a deeper bench full of villains, if that makes sense.
All right. Well, we've talked big hitters, and we've talked the big villains, but in decades and decades of the existence of the DC universe, the Marvel universe, not every comic has been exclusively about these big hitters. All right, I'm going to start with you. Tell me about some of the lesser known characters in the Marvel universe, because it's not always about the big hitters. You gotta have supporting roles. Tell me about the lesser known characters in the Marvel universe.
Well, Tobey Maguire was named in the first Spider-Man trilogy.
Very forgettable.
Very forgettable. Although I didn't dislike him, he was the first Spider-Man. So in terms of lesser known characters in the Avengers arena, did you know that Howard the Duck is an Avengers character? Did not know that until I started looking into this. Daredevil, although that was a terrible movie that Ben Affleck made a few years ago, but he is an Avengers, I guess you could say, hero. Now, the next guy I want to talk about has a series on Netflix. I haven't watched it yet, but it's got really good reviews. You ever heard of Luke Cage? Luke Cage was a man who's wrongly convicted, imprisoned. He was in prison. While he's in prison, he gets unbreakable skin and superhuman strength. Now he gets out, and he becomes a member of the Avengers later on in the comic books and a leader of the Thunderbolts. Another thing that I kind of knew, but Blade is a member of this universe. Now, I'll say this: any movie or any series or any comic that can make Wesley Snipes seem tough is pretty cool. Wesley Snipes does not seem like a hard, what?
Wesley Snipes is very tough. Have you not seen Demolition Man?
I have not seen Demolition Man. I was confused by the look on your face, but he just comes. When I think of Wesley Snipes, I think of, well, he just doesn't come across as rough and tough. So any character that can make him look tough is pretty cool. Of course, you got the X-Men. So I would say, in terms of lesser known characters, I've already went over them, but Howard the Duck and Luke Cage would be two characters that I would talk about, and certainly in the Marvel universe.
Tell me about maybe some of the lesser known DC guys or gals.
How are you going to put X-Men as a lesser known?
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Oh, man. It's crazy. Okay.
Anywho,
some of the lesser known DC guys, at least they were lesser known to me. Maybe in the DC community, these guys may be more heavy hitters than what I have them down for. But the first one was John Constantine, a.k.a. Hellblazer. This guy has demonically tainted blood and is an exorcist. He's a magician. He's a con man. He's got high intelligence, and he's a very cunning guy. And he's got a very dark background because his mother and his brother both died during birth due to some sort of complications that happened because of their father that tried to force her into an abortion. And then once he was born, he left. So just really, really crazy. And that's a lot of what you see with DC. Is the big difference I see is, like, DC, they have these characters that have these really interesting and dark, sometimes really deep stories to them. And maybe Marvel does maybe have a few more guys on their bench. That's debatable. But if they do, they're all the same. Oh, it's a guy. I have a superpower. I'm going to go fight the bad guy. And there's really nothing to that. It's just kind of a copy paste. Anywho, next guy I want to talk about is a guy by the name of Rorschach. This guy also had a rough upbringing. He's the son of a prostitute, and he endured a whole lot of mental abuse, even from his mother. He's one of the more unique characters. You probably know him if you've seen him. He's the guy that wears the cloth over his face. That's the ink blots, and the ink blots shift shapes. And what that was to symbolize is how he himself perceives the world for good and evil. And I'm not real sure if this guy, I guess this guy's more towards being a hero, but he's more kind of less like a mercenary. He just kind of does his own thing and kind of sees things for what it's worth on paper. And if he thinks somebody's doing something wrong, then he goes out and goes after them. It doesn't matter. I mean, it really doesn't really have allegiance, I don't think. At least that's what I got out of it. Another guy by the name of Alec Holland. This guy was killed. There's a lot of death in here. This guy was killed, and he was consumed by what's called the Green, which is Mother Earth, and he became known as Swamp Thing. And Swamp Thing is basically one with the earth, which means that he can manifest himself anywhere that he wants almost instantly. He could be like in the Everglades 1 minute and then manifest himself on the completely other side of the world. And the last one is the Martian Manhunter. This guy has super strength. He can regenerate. He can be invisible. He can teleport. He can shift shapes. And he can kind of pass through objects. So I thought that was definitely worth noting too.
All right. Well, that could possibly fill into this next topic. When we think of superheroes, we think about what sets them apart from normal people. And typically, regardless of whether they came about it by birth as a god or by slipping into a radioactive vat of acid, whatever it may be, what sets them apart is the powers they have, the abilities they have. Very quickly, Bennett, run through some of the cooler, more notable, unique powers and abilities of a few of these DC guys or gals.
Okay, just guys this time. But what I talked about earlier was some of the villains and some of the more iconic villains that Elrod kind of dissed. This is where I get to my heavy hitters. They may not be heavy hitters in the sense of the name or the brand, but there's some pretty wicked dudes. Some pretty wicked dudes. Let me get right into it. There's a dude by the name of Warblade, who was introduced in 1992. This guy is an alien human martial artist with a body of biometal that can be molded to his liking. He could form wings. He can have giant daggers for hands. He could form spider legs or even mimic rain so that he would be able to enter inside of a human's body and tear them apart from the inside. This guy is nearly unkillable, and this dude has an incredible healing factor, making him almost unstoppable. Then you move on to a guy that's even more wicked than that guy, in my book. A guy by the name of Necron that was introduced in 1981. This guy's also a villain. He is the Lord of the Unliving because this guy's already dead. So obviously he's immortal. And with this guy, if he ever was defeated, all he would do is just return back to the land of the unliving, which he rules. He is described as the most powerful dark force in the DC universe. He has the ability to raise the dead, and he can kill with a single touch. And this dude fires bolts of black lightning. And this guy has unlimited ability to grow. Then I've got a hero that was introduced in 1940 by the name of Spectre. And he is arguably the most powerful hero in all of DC. May not be the biggest name, but he's certainly one of the most powerful. He has near limitless powers. He can do pretty much anything that he wants. He can manipulate time and space. He's invulnerable. He can control all matter. And he is capable of destroying an entire universe. And this guy's kind of claim to fame as this guy actually broke the Joker. he was able to make the Joker feel remorse and the guilt of all the like just crazy wicked things that the Joker's done. The guilt of it got to him, and it left the Joker in a catatonic state. And the last guy I want to talk about, I'm not sure if this guy's supposed to be a hero or a villain, but he goes by the name of Lobo. And he was first introduced in 1983. This dude is an intergalactic bounty hunter. He's immune to aging and disease. He's invulnerable and immortal. He can regenerate any body part. He has superhuman strength, stamina, and speed. This guy's crazy. This guy is like self-sustainable. He doesn't need food. He doesn't need water. He doesn't need air, and he doesn't need sleep. And he can survive in space. He has a genius intellect and can trace any prey across the known universe. And according to Lobo himself, he says that he knows 17,897 languages. And kind of right before, towards the end of Stan Lee's life, they were doing, I think it was like a Reddit interview, like a video interview with him. And they asked Stan Lee what was his favorite DC character. And almost without hesitation, he said Lobo. He said Lobo was his favorite DC character of all of them. So I thought that was pretty cool and definitely worth mentioning.
Nice. Elrod, what are some of the cool powers and abilities being harbored over there in the Marvel Universe?
Well, we recently saw a movie featuring this character, but let's talk about Captain Marvel. Or her real name is Carol Danvers, but she has the ability to see the future, manipulate radiation, absorb magical energy. She is a nearly indestructible hero. She can control a lot with her mind. There's basically no limit to her potential. And she has a really kick-butt movie that just came out, too. And we'll get into that here in a minute. You ever heard of Gambit? Either of y'all heard of Gambit before? This guy is really cool. He's a member of the X-Men, but he possesses the mutant ability to change energy. And he uses this energy to explode. And he uses this energy by throwing playing cards, hence the name Gambit. So you've got him, and let's talk about Galactus. Galactus is a devourer of worlds in the Marvel Universe. He's almost like a god character in the Marvel scheme of things. He uses energy from the core of planets and universal sources to sustain himself. He can restore life to planets that he's destroyed. And the last one I want to talk about, you may have seen in the Fantastic Four movies, the original Fantastic Four movies, but the Silver Surfer. He has warp speed. He can teleport. He's immune to diseases, temperature extremes. He can manipulate anything, and he can also destroy entire planets. So that is a taste of some of the really cool Marvel characters that you may not know, especially Gambit, which I thought was pretty cool, how you could throw a playing card and destroy a bunch of crap.
And he's got a sweet bow staff, too.
You know, Rod, you don't realize it, but you just saved yourself a lot because when we got through the characters, I have actually written in my notes that I was going to dock you points for not mentioning Gambit. So you just redeemed yourself a little bit.
There we go.
Like I said, I know a little about both, not a lot about either, but I do love me some Gambit. So you redeemed yourself there.
If you were a superhero, would you be a Gambit? Would you be going around here throwing playing cards at people?
I don't know. Possibly. But we've been talking about comics so far in these universes. Although Elrod, and pretty much every answer he's given me, has alluded to some sort of movie involving the Marvel Universe. So the last topic you guys were prepared for, let's talk about these universes outside of the comic books, off of the paper, on the big screen, on the small screen, in pop culture, the brand itself outside of actual comic books. Tell me about Marvels. All right.
Well, this is where I went right here, plain and simple. Now, DC had a good run in the 90s and the early 2000s with the Batman movies. They did not have such a good run with Brandon Ross Superman. That was kind of a disaster. The Superman movies have been a disaster. Disney buys Marvel in 2009 for $4 billion and all their rights to the characters for the movies. This could have been the greatest and best investment that any entertainment company's ever made, because here's what they've done since they purchased Marvel and the property. They made 23 films. Hi, buddy.
This is my Mr. Bigglesworth. Continue.
Mr. Bigglesworth. 23 movies since Iron Man came out in 2008, and they've got another 14 in development. When you look at the top 50 gross, in terms of gross box office movies of all time, you will find 9 of these are Marvel movies, including number 1. It just overtook Avatar, Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, The Avengers Age of Ultron, Black Panther, Iron Man 3, Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man Far From Home, Captain Marvel. 9 out of the top 50 are Marvel movies. Now, when you look at DC, the highest one is not Batman, surprisingly. None of the Batman movies. It's Aquaman at 23. Batman has a Dark Knight Rises, the Dark Knight, and also Joker. Joker is at 31. Marvel, I don't really know the reason why, other than maybe the studios just have been. The DC folks at Warner Brothers has not had the same success as the Disney folks with the Avengers franchise and with all of the Marvel movies. And I haven't even talked about the X-Men movies. Now, X-Men movies, Disney does not have the rights to those until recently. So they're going to be bringing the X-Men on board, and so funny. I'm killing you with the truth. That's what I'm doing. X-Men. We hadn't even talked about the Spider-Man movies. Sony had the rights to Spider-Man. So what these right here, I'm talking about the Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies are not calculated in these totals, but over $23 billion in gross receipts since the first Iron Man movie. If you want to ask me how much DC has accumulated, it's less than $5 billion. So over 4 times the amount of money at the box office. They're dominating Netflix with Luke Cage. They're dominating other platforms as well. So this is not really a contest. Marvel, when Disney bought Marvel, has dominated DC and Warner Brothers in the box office and also on the streaming platforms as well.
Isn't it? DC's brand and reach beyond the comic book world.
Okay. I'm going to say, yeah, Marvel has been killing it since, when did you say Disney bought the rights?
2008.
2008. Okay. Before that, let's talk about that first real quick. The reason you had Spider-Man with Sony and you had Incredible Hulk with Paramount, and then you had Daredevil, X-Men, Fantastic Four, they were with 21st Century Fox. And all these were separate until Disney bought them in 2008, 2009. The reason they did this is because Marvel filed for bankruptcy in 1996, and they lost their film rights.
They're getting them back.
And while they've been just churning out these movies left and right, what do you think Disney does? They churn out movies. That's what they do. And that it doesn't even have to be any kind of significance to the movie. What is every single Marvel movie about? There's a good guy. He goes out. He fights the bad guy. Nobody gets hurt. Everybody's okay, and the movie's over. And you copy one character, you paste it in. That's what they've been doing. It's been working. I'll give them that. They're killing it. But let's talk a little bit about DC's movies. Their first movie was 1978. That was Superman. And this basically started the whole superhero movie deal as we know it. This kind of laid the framework for all the movies that we have today, because this Superman movie, even though it's 42 years old, it still holds up today, as it still follows like the same narrative as today. Now, this movie made 300 and some odd change $1 million back in 78. When you account for inflation, that's $1.1 billion in today's money. In contrast, the Spider-Man movie in 2002 only made $821 million, which was supposed to be their big, if you want to give Marvel their first big, huge movie, that would be it. And it still made less money than the Superman. But this is DC's bread and butter, Batman. 1989, changed my life, Batman. It made $411 million.
Oh.
Got it. This movie here made $411 million, which, sounds modest. It's no billions and billions like Marvel has, but it was also 1989. But at the time, that's the 5th highest grossing film of all time. Then they stepped it up in 2008 with Dark Knight, when it grossed $1 billion, and at that time ranked the 4th highest, and set a record for the highest grossing domestic opening, and that lasted for 3 years. Think about how crazy that is for a movie to set a record for sales for 3 years when movies are getting churned out weekly. And this Dark Knight really changed the perception of how people view like superhero movies. Of course, Batman's been their most successful franchise, but I feel like DC kind of takes a quality over quantity approach, because they're not just the movies on the big screen. One thing that they've also done pretty well over the years is video games. Superman, 1979 for the Atari, the first superhero video game. See, DC likes to invest their time and energy on different endeavors other than just, let's do movies, let's do comics. They try to branch out. I'd say probably their most notable series is the Arkham series. Is that right? Arkham. Whatever it is. Arkham. Game Informer, which is a pretty well-respected publisher, they ranked their top superhero video games. Number 1 was Arkham City. Number 3 was Arkham Asylum. Number 4 was Arkham Knight. And number 5 was Injustice 2. That's their top. If you're wondering, number 2 was Spider-Man. They did make the list in the top 5. But other than just video games too, they also have the DC animated universe, which started in 92 with Batman and ran all the way into 2006 when they ended with the Justice League. Their most notable publications that came out there in that time was, of course, Batman, Superman, the Justice League. Not a whole lot to hit on that. But they also do really well in animated movies. They've invested more time into animated movies instead of live action movies. And they've been pretty successful at it. Look at The Dark Knight Returns. It scored a 100 on Rotten Tomatoes. Also, Under the Red Hood scored 100. Batman Year One scored an 88, which isn't bad. And there was one that was called Teen Titans Go, which was supposed to be a huge flop, and it scored a 91 on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, moving on real quick to TV shows. They've also dabbled a little bit in live TV shows also. You had Superman in 1952, which was the first comic hero on TV, and that's a Guinness Book of World Record. And everybody knows about the Batman series that ran from 66 into 68. Then you also have some of these that were, I think they're on Netflix or Hulu, I think. But you have like Smallville, which ran for 10 years. You have Arrow, that ran for 9 years. You have Gotham, that ran for 5 years, and it scored a 100 on Rotten Tomatoes. Some of the ones you have right now, you have Flash, that's been around since 2014. You have Lucifer, it's been around since 2016, and Supergirl, it's been around since 2015, and Titans, which started 2 years ago, and they're getting ready to do their third season. Also, too, they dabbled a little bit in animated as well. You had Batman from 92 to 95. That's such an iconic animated series. You have Teen Titans Go, which has been around since 2013, and it's still going. You've got the Justice League. You had Superman. There's been a lot of Supermans, but most notably the one that ran from 96 to 2000. And even Harley Quinn, she's got her own animated series now, and it's in its second year. So, yeah, Marvel has more movies. But like I said, they're just cut and dry. They're from Disney. And one thing about DC, they've always been a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. So to me, it looks like DC, although they haven't been pumping out the movies lately, they've done a really good job of being very well-rounded outside of comics.
One thing quickly, I forgot to mention, right? You know, on the equivalent of the Avengers is the Justice League. The Justice League movie that was put out a couple years ago got a 28 on Rotten Tomatoes, which is, to be fair, only 3% higher than 50 Shades of Grey. So that's the quality movie they're cranking out over there at Warner Brothers. With their
Shades of Grey made a lot of money, though.
It did, but 3% higher than 50 Shades of Grey.
All right, gentlemen. I had a couple follow-up questions. For the sake of time, I'm going to narrow it down to the fun one. It's a two-part question. I'm going to ask each of you the first part, and then I'm going to ask you the second part. And I'm going to start with Bennett. You're going into battle, and you have to take 3, whether heroes or villains, from the DC universe with you. First part of the question, which 3 are you taking?
If I'm going into battle, I'm going to take Spectre just because of how powerful he is and his near limitless powers. So he can do pretty much anything, like I mentioned before. I'm also going to take, I'll take Lobo as well, just because this guy right here is pretty nasty. He's got the superhuman strength, stamina, and speed. He doesn't need food, water, all that stuff. He's immune to aging and disease, immortal. So I'll take him. And I'll probably take Batman just because I'm a big homer for Batman. Got to have the bat.
All right. What 3 Marvel characters are you taking into battle?
We'll make this quick. I'm taking Captain Marvel. And I'm taking Thanos because Thanos is the Mad Titan. And I'm going to take Doctor Strange because he's going to switch all the dimensions up. Captain Marvel is going to be my muscle, and Thanos can be my muscle too. So I'm going to be kind of unbeatable with those 3.
Second part of the question, I'm going to start with you, Elrod. Tell me why Captain Marvel, Thanos, and Doctor Strange, tell me why they would beat Spectre, Lobo, and Batman.
Well, Thanos is just going to crush Batman with his fist. I mean, what's Batman going to do? Try to kill him with money? That's about the only thing he can do, or his nice utility belt that he wears. Captain Marvel is going to fly around and do what she does. She's going to whoop him. And Doctor Strange is going to change dimensions so quick, they're not going to know what hit him.
Bennett? Why is Spectre, Lobo, and Batman going to win this battle?
And who are they going against? Thanos.
Thanos, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel.
Doctor Strange. Captain Marvel.
He's mapping out a plan.
Yeah, this
Not
involvement.
really.
It better if you're going to win.
Well, Spectre can control all matter. So I think that guy can pick up the slack for Batman.
Was he going to manufacture money?
Manufacture money? What? Did you say manufacture money?
Yeah. You said he controls all matter. Is he going to manufacture some money for Batman to beat Thanos?
Maybe. I don't know. He can do whatever he wants. Spectre.
Hey, the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase said one time, everybody's got a price, and Batman can pay it. But continue in it.
Then you've got Lobo. So let's say Thanos goes after Lobo, knocks off an arm. Okay. He can regenerate that. So now he has it back. So no matter what these guys try to do to Lobo, he's going to be able to regenerate that. And one thing that I didn't allude to earlier was that Lobo also has the ability to shed blood and recreate another Lobo. But this power was killed because it was too powerful. So if that was the case, and he still had this power, depending on the time frame of this battle going down, if they were to attack Lobo and are able to hurt him, then that blood is going to make more of them. So now what are you going to do? And then you've got Batman that's going to pull up in the freaking Batmobile, and they're going to get out of Dodge.
Oh, gosh.
All right, gentlemen. This has been fun. It's been educational. Elrod, I had two things marked off against you. One of them, you redeemed yourself by mentioning Gambit.
Oh, gosh.
So kudos to that. You getting docked a point by not mentioning the Juggernaut.
The Juggernaut.
I mean, come on. And you basically downplayed X-Men completely in favor of the Avengers, which is kind of offensive to me. But
Oh, come on.
to each his own, to somebody that just watches the movies. But speaking of the movies, we can look at quality, we can look at quantity as far as movies go, but at the end of the day, money talks. And honestly, I think when you look at it, DC probably has put out some better stuff as far as quality outside of the comic book world, but it's hard to ignore the amount of money that Marvel has made really in just the last decade. The box office numbers they've put up. You know, we talked about Brady Manning a few weeks ago. I said, you can say what you want, but I can't look past 6 Super Bowl rings. In this instance, on that topic, I can't look past all the success at the box office that Marvel has had just in recent years. What have you done for me lately? They've made a butt ton of money lately at the box office. So as far as the brand outside of the comic books, going beyond the comic books, Marvel, for sure, easily. But outside of that fact, Marvel. I marvel at how much Bennett did his research for this episode. I'll give you another point, though, Elrod. Stan Lee. So Stan Lee.
Hard to argue that.
I mean, you can't argue that at all. Can't argue Stan Lee. Can't argue box office success. As far as the history and the origins, both of them have held up not just for years, but for decades, pushing on a century. They're both iconic. They're both have longevity. I don't see either one going away anytime soon. Both classic brands. But when we look at the big hitters, I mean, how can we look at big hitters and not go with Batman, Superman? Don't get me wrong. I love the Avengers. I love the X-Men that you downplayed. But Batman, Superman. Even if you take Michael Keaton out, who's by far the best Batman. But it's hard when you're talking big hitters, when you talk about superheroes, ask any kid before 2008 who their favorite superhero is.
Spider-Man.
It's Batman, or it's one of three. It's Batman, it's Superman, or it's Spider-Man. Two of those go to DC. When you look at the villains, you didn't mention Juggernaut. Thanos is a big deal, but like Bennett said, Batman alone, the Batman villains alone, take the cake there. Joker, probably the most iconic comic book villain ever. Now, not all Batman villains are great. Look at Mr. Freeze. But when you look at
that should be a point deducted from him automatically. That and the disaster that was Poison Ivy and Bane in that movie. Just saying.
Bane's a good character, other than the movie.
They made up for Bane. And don't you dare say a bad word about Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face or Jim Carrey as the Riddler, because both were fantastic.
But you don't like Val Kilmer.
Val Kilmer was third on my list. He's right there in the middle. Lesser known characters. Honestly, I didn't know a lot about any of the lesser known characters. I thought you both did a good job. Coolest powers and abilities I didn't know a lot about, especially those lesser known guys. Both did a good job. The 3-on-3 battle at the end was fun. At the end of the day, I have to look at the big picture. And I have to say that Elrod, I'm sorry. Bennett, you have convinced me. I'm taking DC. But a fun, close battle. Bennett, would you like to give a victory speech?
Well, outside of just Batman, and maybe even a little bit to a lesser extent Superman and Wonder Woman, I didn't really know a lot of these characters, so it was really interesting to kind of dive in and kind of see just how great some of the heavy hitters and some of the lesser known guys really were. And also I learned a ton about Marvel, because really, I knew Spider-Man. I was a big, huge X-Men guy. I wish they were in DC, but other than that, none of those other people I really knew a whole lot about. So it was very, very informative for me on both sides.
Elrod, obviously not a big X-Men guy.
Never watched one single X-Men movie.
You didn't even mention Wolverine.
Well, he's part of the X-Men. I consider him X-Men.
Oh my!
He is X-Men. You didn't mention him.
Well, he's like the Avengers.
You didn't have to mention movies.
Before 2008.
You supposedly claim to be a '90s kid. What was one of the best cartoons of the '90s? The X-Men.
Wolverine is he was one of the faces of Marvel before all these movies started churning out. You had Spider-Man, then you had Wolverine.
Yeah.
Shame.
Not a big Wolverine guy.
Shame.
I like Batman.
But at the end of the day, both great franchises. I'm not a big comic book guy, but I'm in a weird position that I respect comic book people. I like professional wrestling. So, I'm into people that like stuff that may be frowned upon by larger society. I hang out with a lot of people that are comic book guys. And I respect it even if I don't know a lot about it. So hopefully, if you're a big comic book fan, we haven't offended you too much to the point that you hate us and put out bounties on us.
No, I have.
Do what?
I know I have.
Dr. X is going to knock on your door later. Is your front door handicap accessible? Anyway. Guys, thanks for checking us out. Episode 6, as in the books. Be sure you like us on Facebook. Be sure you like us on Instagram. Check us out every Tuesday night, 6 o'clock, right here on the Facebook page. And guys, be sure to check in next week. We've got a pretty cool episode coming up for you next week. A hodgepodge episode, a lot of smaller topics we couldn't really turn a big episode into, but a lot of them come from your suggestions. So be sure you're here to check that out. And within the next couple of weeks, me and these two gentlemen here have been in talks. We might have a pretty cool little surprise pop up on our page.
Yeah, I might win one.
Well, here's the thing. Next week, there's a bunch of small topics. Your chances increase there, but probably not. Anyway, any parting words before we sign off, gentlemen?
All right.
Parting words?
I like Batman.
I like Gambit and Batman, so it was fun
I
though. It
thought
was
that
fun.
Batman would go in a battle and just throw money at people and he would win. So
It's possible.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you here next week for a hodgepodge episode. Be sure to spread the word. And we'll see you back here one last time as we sign off. Bennett, congratulations. You have convinced me. Peace.